Mars, the red planet. It never fails, does it? The
Yeah.
allure, the mystery, it just pulls us in. And speaking of being pulled in, you sent us quite a collection of research all about Mars colonization.
Mhm.
It seems like you're really ready to, well, dive deep.
It really does capture the imagination. And what's interesting is that unlike some of those far out science fiction stories, there's a lot of practical potential for humans living on Mars.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more than just cool, right? I mean, one thing that jumped out at me from all this research is the Martian day, they call it a sol, is so close to an Earth day, about 24.6 hours. That has to be a big plus.
Yeah, it is. You see, our internal clocks, our circadian rhythms, they're very much tied to that 24-hour cycle. A close match like that on Mars means, well, we're less likely to get all messed up, with sleep and disorientation and all those health problems that could come from a really different day length.
Right, I can see that. I mean, who needs more messed up sleep?
Yeah.
Right. But even with a similar day, there's still the question of, well, breathing, for one thing.
And that's where the water ice on Mars becomes a key player. It's not just about, having some water to drink or for crops. We can actually split those water molecules using electrolysis, get oxygen for breathing and hydrogen for fuel.
So, water ice equals potential air. I'm starting to see the picture here. But what about radiation? I know that's a major concern with Mars, and some of these articles you sent, wow, some wild solutions.
Yeah, the Martian atmosphere, it's pretty thin, doesn't offer much protection from the sun's radiation and all that cosmic radiation, which can be, well, really damaging to our cells. We're talking increased risk of cancer, neurological issues, the whole works.
Okay, so no casual strolls on Mars without, like, serious protection. I guess a spacesuit wouldn't cut it.
Not for very long, no. Habitats would need some serious shielding. They're looking into all sorts of things, like using Martian soil, regolith to build protective layers, even ideas about underground habitats, maybe even living in lava tubes, using natural features for shielding.
Like living in Martian caves. That's a different picture than those fancy domes we see in movies.
That reminds me, remember in The Martian, Matt Damon growing potatoes in Martian soil?
Ah, that actually ties into a really important concept for making Mars colonization work. In situ resource utilization. They call it ISRU for short. Basically, it's about using what Mars already has, so you don't have to haul everything from Earth.
So Martian soil for growing food, water from the ice, building materials, it all plays into this ISRU thing.
Exactly. The more we can work with what Mars has, the more sustainable, the more realistic long-term colonization becomes. And it gets even, well, more amazing. They're researching ways to create methane and oxygen directly from the water and CO2 on Mars. Think about it, using Martian resources to make fuel and air.
Wow, that's living off the land on a whole other level. But what about this terraforming idea? Making Mars more like Earth. Seems pretty ambitious, almost science fiction-y. Yeah, that's definitely ambitious. There's lots of debate about it. One idea is releasing greenhouse gases into the Martian atmosphere to, well, trap heat, maybe even kickstart a greenhouse effect like we see on Earth. Of course, on Mars, it would be a controlled, beneficial thing.
So deliberately causing climate change, but on Mars. That raises some serious ethical questions. And what about those unintended consequences?
Right, it's a big discussion. Another idea, even more out there, is redirecting asteroids to hit Mars, delivering water ice and other materials. But the technology for that is, well, it's a long way off. We're not quite there yet.
That's some serious planetary engineering. Amazing to think about. But with all these solutions, are we actually making real progress? Or is this all just theory right now?
Right.
So we've been talking about, surviving on Mars, the air, the water, the radiation, even terraforming. But something else keeps coming up in this research, and that's the psychological impact. Being on another planet, that's got to do a number on you, right?
Oh, absolutely. Sending robots to Mars, that's one thing. But humans, we're social creatures. We're used to open spaces, fresh air, the rhythms of nature.
Yeah, you said it. Even a trip to the grocery store can feel stressful sometimes. Imagine being like cooped up in a habitat on Mars, millions of miles away from everything you know.
It's a whole different ballgame. They've done studies, in isolated places like Antarctic research stations, and the results are in. Long-term isolation, it can really mess you up. Depression, anxiety, conflicts with the people around you, even your sleep and thinking get affected.
It's like that saying, no man is an island. But on Mars, you'd basically be living on an island in space.
And it's not just being isolated, it's the communication delay with Earth. Depending on where the planets are, it could take like 4 to 24 minutes for a message to get there, one way. Imagine trying to talk to your family back home.
Forget talking. Even email would be a hassle. Makes you appreciate instant messaging, right? But it's not just the psychological stuff. You've got to build a whole new society on Mars.
Yeah.
How do you even start? I mean, how do you create a community, a shared identity with just a handful of people in a totally alien place?
That's the million-dollar question. Social scientists are working on it, believe me. One thing's for sure, choosing the right people is key. Not just scientists and engineers, but artists, teachers, people who can care for others, people who can, bring everyone together and give them a sense of purpose.
So it's not just about like technical skills. It's about building a community that can, well, survive, thrive even. But even with the right people, there could be conflicts, disagreements, maybe even power struggles as this Martian society grows. What about governing? Who makes the rules? Who enforces them? How do you settle disputes?
Another big one. Initially, it's probably going to be a mix. You'll have some control from Earth, from governments and companies, but also some self-governance by the colonists themselves.
So like Earth control meets Martian independence. That's got to be tricky to balance.
It will be. And they'll have to be really smart about it, flexible to build a system that works on Mars. Think about resources. How do you make sure everyone has what they need? Water, energy, living space, all in this limited and harsh environment.
It really hits you, doesn't it? Colonizing Mars isn't just about rockets and habitats. It's about creating a new civilization. Kind of daunting, but also exciting.
It is exciting, and it makes us think about ourselves, like, what are our values? What kind of society do we want? How will living on Mars change us as people, as a species?
It's like Mars is this mirror reflecting all our hopes and fears for the future. But let's come back to the present for a minute. What's happening now? What are the concrete steps being taken to get us closer to this Mars dream?
Well, we've talked about the amazing work those robotic missions are doing, like Curiosity and Perseverance. They're not just sending back pretty pictures, they're collecting crucial data. The soil, the atmosphere, all that's vital for planning future missions, both robotic and human.
Like they're the advanced team scouting out the territory for us.
Exactly. And here on Earth, things are moving too. NASA's Artemis program, that's the one focused on the moon, it's a crucial stepping stone to Mars. All the technology, the strategies they're developing for Artemis, like life support systems and using local resources, it'll all be directly applicable to Mars missions down the line.
So the moon is like our practice run, a way to, I don't know, work out the kinks before we go for the big one, Mars.
You got it. And don't forget about the private companies. SpaceX, Blue Origin, all those folks. They're making huge progress with reusable rockets and spacecraft. It's all about making space travel more affordable, more realistic for those Mars missions.
It's pretty amazing to see all this happening, this collaboration, this drive to innovate.
Yeah.
Feels like we're entering a whole new age of space exploration. But with all this going on, what's the timeline? Realistically, when do we see humans on Mars?
Timelines. Well, they're always tricky, especially with something this big. But as of now, NASA's goal is to get humans to Mars sometime in the 2030s. And the private companies, some of them are even more ambitious. They're talking about crewed missions as early as the late 2020s.
The 2020s, the 2030s, that's not that far away.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think that, well, some of us might actually see this happen. But even as it gets closer, it's important to remember Mars colonization, it's not just about the technology.
You're right. It's about pushing ourselves, our ingenuity, our resilience, how we work together. It's about facing the unknown with curiosity, with a sense of adventure, and with respect for the challenges ahead.
And in the end, it's about, well, understanding ourselves, our place in this whole vast universe and all the amazing possibilities out there. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. All these details about Mars colonization, from the water ice to the challenges of building a new society. It's clear that this is a truly massive endeavor.
Absolutely massive, no doubt about it. But it's also incredibly inspiring. This whole idea of reaching for Mars, it pushes us in every way, scientifically, technologically, even what it means to be human.
And as we talked about, it's not about, running away from Earth's problems. It's about figuring out how to live sustainably in a whole new environment, facing ethical dilemmas and, expanding our horizons as a species.
Exactly. And the things we learn along the way, those closed-loop life support systems, how to collaborate in extreme environments, that could all help us right here on Earth with things like climate change, resource scarcity.
So even if you're not, packing your bags for Mars, what we learn from this could impact all of us.
That's why this is such a fascinating time. It feels like a turning point. We're not just talking about another planet. We're talking about the future of humanity.
And speaking of the future, we started this whole deep dive with a question for you, our listener. If you were offered a one-way ticket to Mars, would you go?
We've talked about the possibilities, the challenges, the ethical side of it all, the sheer scale of it. Now it's your turn. What do you think?
Would you leave everything behind? The comforts of Earth? For the chance to be a pioneer, to help build a new civilization on a whole other planet.
There's no right answer, no wrong answer. It's a personal choice. What does this opportunity mean to you?
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope you'll keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, keep imagining what's possible. The future of humanity on Mars and everywhere is still being written.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be part of that story.